They were last seen driving away from the church, Race still clinging to the satin of her dress, the rear bumper trailing tin cans that clattered against the pavement like anxious hearts beating in metal. Someone said they looked like happiness itself. Someone else said they were glowing. But memories have a way of softening themselves, especially when the years begin to demand answers that nobody ever found. At least, not for 12 long years. Their names were Elena Whitefeather and Thomas Blackwood, both 23, both Cherokee, both raised only 4 miles apart on the edge of the reservation land near Tahlequah, Oklahoma. They had known each other since they were children who shared the same school bus, the same dirt roads, the same seasonal droughts, and the same sense that life wasn't meant to leave them here forever. Everyone said they were inseparable long before they even realized it themselves. Some love stories begin with sudden lightning. Theirs was more like slow-burning cedar, steady and warm. Elena was the quieter of the two. She worked part-time at the tribal community clinic, helping elders schedule appointments and translating English medical instructions into Cherokee when needed. She carried a softness that didn't feel fragile. It felt more like a gentle strength, like river water smoothing stone. Her mother used to say she was born listening, to the wind, to people's eyes, to what was unsaid. She wore her hair long and uncut, tied with a burgundy woven ribbon, something her grandmother made on a loom before passing. Thomas was different. Loud laughter, fast footsteps, always in motion. He couldn't sit still. He worked for the county's water utility service, repairing cracked pipelines, inspecting reservoirs, and driving the same rural roads every day. He dreamed of one day opening a youth center for tribal kids, somewhere they could feel safe, seen, taught their language with pride, taught their stories without shame. His father always said, "That boy's heart is bigger than he knows what to do with." But love stories don't go missing by themselves. Disappearances don't happen in silence. There were shadows around them long before the wedding day. In early 1983, a development company, a name spoken hushed even now, had begun pressuring Cherokee families near the lakeside to sell land for a private resort. Most families refused. The company sent surveyors anyway. Arguments turned into threats. Elders said the land had memory and wouldn't tolerate being gutted. Developers laughed. Sheriffs sided with the men in suits. Lines were drawn where roads and fences hadn't existed before. Thomas became one of the loudest voices against the sale. He didn't do it alone. He brought community members to council meetings, gathered signatures, and questioned environmental impact reports that conveniently minimized harm to the water. He had evidence, handwritten notes, recorded conversations, documents copied in the county office when no one was looking. People said he was fearless. But fear has a way of growing in other people instead. A week before the wedding, Thomas told his brother Daniel something that would haunt him forever. "If anything happens to us, don't let them take the lake." Daniel had brushed it off, thinking stress was talking. There was planning to do, venue decorations, food, music, who would speak, who would dance. Everyone was too busy imagining beginnings to consider endings. On May 14, 1983, under an open sky streaked with early summer heat and the smell of red earth warmed by sun, Elena and Thomas were married at a small white church just outside town. The church was modest, wooden, paint peeling in corners, but filled with relatives, neighbors, classmates, cousins twice removed, elders who wiped their eyes quietly, teenagers who whispered about how perfect the couple looked. The choir sang hymns in Cherokee. Elena's mother tied a strand of white beads around the couple's joined hands, a blessing of unity carried from old ceremony into new. When they left the church, the world seemed suspended in golden light. Someone threw sunflower petals, because they were cheaper than lilies but just as bright. The photographer captured them laughing beside the car, a cream-colored 1967 Chevy Impala, polished to a mirror shine by Thomas and Daniel the night before. The car looked like a promise. They were supposed to drive 30 minutes to a lakeside lodge for a small family reception. They never arrived. Witnesses saw them leave the church parking lot at 4:17 p.m. Elena leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder as he steered. They looked exhausted, but happy. The tin cans rattled behind them. Someone heard music through the open window, something soft, maybe Smokey Robinson. 15 minutes later, another driver, an older farmer, noticed something that would only matter later. A dark green truck was behind the couple's car, too close, tailgating, pressuring the Impala to drive faster. The farmer said he slowed to see if the truck would pass, but it didn't. It stayed fixed behind the wedding car like a shadow stitched to its bumper. The farmer mentioned it casually that night at dinner. He mentioned it again a week later, and again 2 months after that, when the posters stayed up and the searches began to feel like waking nightmares nobody could escape. But the sheriff's office dismissed him every time. Probably just someone in a hurry. Roads are narrow out there, plenty of close traffic. You're remembering wrong. Memory does not misremember the uncomfortable. That evening, when they did not arrive, their families assumed a delay. When the sun fell, they assumed car trouble. When midnight came and went, fear sharpened into something brittle and cold. By sunrise, search parties were arranged. Tribal community members led the effort themselves because the sheriff's office treated it as a voluntary disappearance. Young couples run off sometimes, they said. No urgency, no helicopters, no roadblocks. People from the reservation combed the woods, the bridges, the creeks, every mile of road between the church and the lodge. They searched for days, weeks, months. The lake was dragged once, half-heartedly, in a single shallow sweep. The water was cloudy that week, swollen from rain. Visibility was nearly zero. They stopped the search early, citing cost. The families begged, they pleaded, they filed reports, they prayed, and then silence settled like dust over everything. The wedding car became legend, a ghost that supposedly had slipped off the road into the dark woods where no one ever found it. Some said the couple left to start over. Others whispered something darker, that someone made sure they disappeared. But grief, when stretched over years, hardens into a quiet ache that never leaves. The Whitefeather and Blackwood families learned to survive with absence as something living in the house with them. 12 years passed. 12 summers. 12 winters. 12 cycles of birthdays celebrated with an empty chair. And then, in the summer of 1995, after the worst drought in decades, the lake's water level dropped farther than anyone remembered it ever dropping before. Something metal surfaced, something cream-colored, something with tin can strings still tangled around its rusted rear bumper. The wedding car had been there the entire time, and what was inside would break the silence forever. They say that when the water pulls back, it reveals what time tried to keep hidden. Lakes are storytellers. Slow ones, patient ones. They hold secrets in silt and silence, waiting for the moment the world is finally forced to look. The summer of 1995 was punishing. The air cracked with heat, grass browned to straw. Reservoir levels across Cherokee Nation ran lower than anyone had anticipated. Fishermen walked out where they once floated, stepping across flaky mud patterned like broken pottery. Bones of forgotten fence posts emerged. The outlines of old riverbed trees, long drowned, stood like pale ghosts on the shoreline. But it was the lake near town, Clearwater Lake, a name that would sound bitterly ironic afterward, that drew the most attention. On an ordinary August morning, a teenager named Riley Snow, 15, restless, and always searching the lakebed for lost fishing lures to resell, noticed sunlight reflecting sharply off something in the distance. Not driftwood, not rock. Something smooth, something curved, something unmistakably man-made. At first, he thought it might be a capsized metal boat, but as he moved closer, boots making sucking noises in the mud, his breath caught in his chest. He recognized the shape from old stories told in low voices at family dinners, community gatherings, and that one candlelight vigil nobody wanted to remember. It was a car. He didn't know the color at first, the mud covered too much, but he recognized the silhouette of an old model, the long hood, the curved trunk. A classic. Something beloved, something cared for. He ran. Riley sprinted all the way to the bait shop where his uncle worked, lungs burning, shirt clinging to his back. When he burst through the door, he couldn't get words out at first. Just gasps, hands pointing back toward the shoreline as if direction alone could speak. His uncle, Samuel Snow, followed him without question. By noon, word had traveled faster than phone lines could carry it. A crowd formed along the exposed lake edge, not just locals. Elders came, leaning on canes. Mothers brought children by the hand. Men who had searched the woods 12 years earlier stood silently, hats clutched in calloused hands. Grief has a way of calling everyone back. Someone told Daniel Blackwood. Someone told the Whitefeather family. They arrived within minutes. The sheriff's office arrived too, but not because they cared. They came because crowds meant liability, because discoveries meant paperwork, because lost things resurfacing made old mistakes breathe again. But when Daniel, now 35, lined around the eyes, older in sorrow than in years, stepped through the crowd, the sheriff's deputies moved aside. They remembered him. They remembered his accusations, his protests, his refusal to forget. He did not cry when he saw the car, not yet. Grief has its own timing. The mud clung thickly to the vehicle, holding it as if the earth itself refused to release it. The lake's waterline sat far behind, making the Impala look stranded in a no-man's land of cracked clay. The once cream paint had darkened to the color of dead leaves. The chrome was dull. The windows were coated in sediment and algae filaments dried into streaks by the sun, but the shape of the car was unmistakable, and so were the tin cans, rust-eaten, barely attached, tangled on the rear bumper. A remnant of joy that now felt blasphemous. Someone dropped to their knees. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else said they felt something cold pass through them, though the heat was sweltering. The sheriff ordered everyone to stand back, not because of safety, but because time was about to speak, and he wanted control of its voice. A tow truck was sent for. It took nearly 3 hours to arrive. In those hours, the sun baked the mud, tightening its grip around the tires. The lake shimmered in the distance like a mirage. And Daniel stood there, unmoving, like the roots of an oak. When the tow chain was finally hooked and the winch began to grind, the mud resisted. The Impala groaned like something waking from a deep, unwilling sleep. With each inch the car lifted, silt and water gushed from its seams, as if it were bleeding memories back into the earth. The front windshield was the first surface they could truly see. And that's when the crowd fell into silence so thick it felt like the air itself refused to move. Through the glass, dim and cloudy, 2 shapes sat in the front seats. Not bodies as they once were, but what time had sculpted them into, skeletons, still seated, still upright, still buckled. Elena in the passenger seat, her skull tilted slightly toward the driver's side, strands of long hair, dark, now tangled and matted, still clinging to bone like threads of memory refusing to let go, Her rib cage had collapsed inward. The bones of her hands rested near her lap. But there was something else. Her left wrist bones were angled strange, as if she had been grasping something or someone. Thomas sat behind the wheel. His skull was bowed forward slightly. One hand was still near the steering wheel. His seatbelt strap lay across his clavicle bones like a diagonal scar. His right forearm bones hung lower, resting across the seat between them. Between their skeletons, where hands might have once intertwined, was something faint but unmistakably deliberate. Their ring fingers were looped together. They had died holding hands. The crowd broke. Some cried, some turned away, some covered their mouths to keep from sobbing. Daniel didn't move, not even to wipe the tears that finally streaked down his face. The sheriff spoke too quickly, too cleanly, too rehearsed. Looks like they must have gone off the road. An accident. Tragic, but accidental. Those words hit the ground like broken glass. The crowd didn't believe it. Not one person. Because everyone remembered something the sheriff seemed eager to forget. The green truck, the tailgating, the arguments about land, the threats. The night the search was stopped early, the way certain records went missing, the way the sheriff had dismissed every sighting as exaggeration, and something else. This lake had been searched. Thoroughly, according to official statements. Back then, divers had supposedly gone through the area where the car now rested. So why hadn't it been found? Unless someone wanted it hidden. Unless someone ensured it stayed hidden. Unless someone knew. As the car was lifted entirely from the mud and placed on a flatbed truck, something dislodged from beneath the chassis. A small metal rectangle, crusted in dirt. A license plate. But not the one belonging to the Impala. A second plate, a green one, from a work truck. The crowd saw it, the sheriff saw it, and the sheriff's face changed. Not with shock, but with recognition. Because everyone knew the color of those trucks. They belonged to the development company. The one that had tried to take the land. The one Thomas had been fighting. The one whose employees drove through town like they owned it. The one protected by the sheriff's office. The second plate had been jammed under the Impala, wedged near the undercarriage, maybe during impact, maybe during force, maybe intentionally. The tow operator picked it up, turning it over in his gloved hands. The numbers were weathered, but legible. And when Daniel saw the plate, he said only one word. I know who that belonged to. The sheriff stepped forward, voice raised, suddenly rigid. That's enough. Everyone disperse. This is now an official investigation, but no one moved. The land was watching, the lake was listening, and the truth had finally surfaced. The lake had given back its secret, but secrets once surfaced rarely sit quietly. They begin to move. They begin to grow. They begin to tear apart everything that once held them in place. The Impala was taken to a county storage garage that had once been a grain warehouse. The walls were metal, thin, and echoed every sound. The heat that summer made the air inside feel heavy, metallic, hard to breathe. A guard was posted outside, a deputy who looked like he wished to be anywhere else. But he was only there for one purpose, to keep people out, not to watch over the dead. Daniel arrived early the next morning with his mother, Nora Blackwood, now in her 60s, her hair silver and braided tight, her back straight as a pine tree. Some grief bends people, some grief steals them. Nora was the latter. She had waited 12 years for answers. 12 years of setting 2 extra plates at the table during holidays because some habits become wounds you learn to live with. When they arrived, the sheriff was already inside, not inspecting, not documenting, just standing near the Impala with his arms crossed tightly, jaw set. His name was Sheriff Raymond Adler, a man who had been re-elected 4 times, always with the endorsement of the wealthiest landowners and business developers. He wore his badge like ownership rather than responsibility. Nora did not look at him. She walked past him as if he were dust in sunlight. Thomas and Elena's skeletons were still inside the Impala. They had not been removed yet because the county coroner had not arrived. Nora placed her hand softly against the glass of the passenger side window. Her fingers were steady. "You found your way home," she whispered. Daniel stood beside her. His hands were clenched at his sides. He hadn't spoken since the night before. Sheriff Adler cleared his throat. "I want to be clear. This was likely a runaway vehicle. Narrow roads, no guardrails. The car probably lost traction and slid into the lake. We'll confirm that once we extract the—" Nora's voice cut clean through the stale air. "We searched this lake." Thoroughly, Sheriff Adler didn't respond. He stared at her but said nothing. Daniel stepped forward. "We dragged this water for 2 months, every day, with boats and divers. You supervised the search. You told us where to look." The sheriff shifted his stance. "Well, water levels were different then. Sediment shifts. Visibility—" "No," Daniel said. "We searched this exact area. I know because I marked it myself." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every missed plea, every ignored call, every night Nora prayed into darkness that felt endless. Nora turned, slowly, deliberately, to face Sheriff Adler. "You told us they ran away," she said. "You told us to stop looking. You told us to move on." The sheriff inhaled, chest rising. "Sometimes families need closure. Even if closure is for the truth," Nora said, "not for lies." The metal walls seemed to absorb her words and vibrate them back. Just then, the coroner's van pulled up. The coroner, Dr. Irene Caldwell, stepped out, hair in a bun, glasses perched low, her steps quick and brisk. She was not from the county. She had been brought in at the request of the tribal council, who had insisted this investigation be conducted by someone neutral, someone who didn't owe favors to county politics, someone the sheriff could not manipulate. The sheriff's jaw tightened when he saw her. Irene greeted Nora and Daniel first. She placed a hand on Nora's shoulder. "I will treat them with care," she said softly. Only after that did she nod to the sheriff. The extraction of the remains was slow, careful, reverent. Bones can break even after death. Time makes everything delicate. Gloves moved gently. Tools clicked softly. Nora stood present through all of it, shoulders straight, hand resting on the Impala's hood as if anchoring her children back to the living world. Thomas's bones were removed first, then Elena's. Each was placed in separate covered trays. A quiet hush filled the room, as if every breath risked disturbing the fragile dignity of the moment. Only after the remains were taken away did Irene turn her attention to the second license plate, now cleaned, numbers visible. "County Water Utility," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "I knew it." Sheriff Adler stepped forward quickly. "There are hundreds of those trucks in circulation." Daniel cut him off. "Not with these serial numbers." He pointed to the plate. On the back, half rusted but still distinct, were inventory marks used only during a 5-year period in the early 1980s. A narrow window. Thomas had worked for the county water department. But there was more. There had been only 6 trucks issued with those specific inventory numbers, and one belonged to someone everyone in town knew. Clint Rourke, supervisor of land surveys, liaison between the county and the developers, friend of the sheriff, a man who had made himself too comfortable in places he didn't belong. The same man who had told Thomas, during a heated argument outside the council hall, You think you can stop progress? I'll bury your name so deep no one remembers you existed." Several people heard it. No one reported it, because in that town some threats were treated as weather, unpleasant but inevitable. The sheriff exhaled, slow, calculated. "Speculation," he said. "That plate could have gotten there in any number of ways. Someone could have lost it, could have washed down in a storm." Nora turned to him again, and this time her voice was not sorrow. It was iron. "You knew," she said. "You knew 12 years ago." Sheriff Adler's eyes flickered, just for a moment, a thin crack in a thick shield, and Daniel saw it. "We're not asking you anymore," he said. "We're telling you. This is murder, and we will prove it." Irene nodded, confirming without hesitation. "I'll start with the autopsy. From the bone fractures, sediment traces, algae growth, and seatbelt position, we'll know whether the car hit the water by accident or was forced." The sheriff's look darkened. Daniel didn't flinch. Nora didn't blink. Something had shifted. Not loud, not explosive, but irreversible. For 12 years, silence had been enforced through power, through dismissal, through exhaustion. But the lake had spoken, and now the land would answer. That afternoon, Daniel drove his mother home. The sky was heavy, gray, swollen with heat that promised storm. The kind of storm the land holds for years, waiting for the right moment to break open. When they reached the house, Nora went inside quietly. Daniel stayed on the porch, hands on the railing, looking out toward the distant line of trees that marked the border of tribal land. He remembered what Thomas had said the week before the wedding. "If anything happens to us, don't let them take the lake." Daniel whispered into the wind, "I hear you." But grief was not done testing them, because that night at 2:14 a.m., someone set fire to the county storage garage where the Impala had been kept. Flames rose through the metal siding, cracking glass, twisting beams. The roof caved inward. The smoke smelled of burning oil and old rubber. And when firefighters arrived, they did not find a car. The Impala was gone, not destroyed, not burned, removed. Someone stole it before the fire was lit. Someone who knew the investigation was about to expose the truth. Someone who still believed they could bury the past. But the past was no longer willing to stay buried. The fire lit up the night sky like a warning. Not a message written in words, but one carved in fear. People watched from porches, from doorways, from bedroom windows with lights off. Smoke curled upward in twisting black ribbons, blotting stars one by one. It smelled of gasoline, not accident. It smelled of a decision. The next morning, the town woke to the news before the fire trucks had even cooled. The county garage was destroyed. The wedding car was gone. There was no mystery in how or why, only in how brazen someone had become to erase evidence after 12 long years of pretending there was nothing to erase. Nora stood in her kitchen, hands still wet from rinsing herbs for tea, when Daniel told her. "They took it," he said. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't weep. She closed the faucet, dried her hands, then said, "Then we go to the truth they can't burn." And that truth lay with the remains. The tribal council had insisted the couple's bones be transported to the Cherokee Nation Medical Center rather than the county morgue. The sheriff objected. The sheriff lost. The air had shifted, not loudly, but decisively. Dr. Irene Caldwell waited for Daniel and Nora in the examination room. White light, clean surfaces, a stillness that felt sacred rather than clinical. 2 stainless steel tables stood parallel to each other. On each, carefully arranged, were the bones of Elena and Thomas. Not scattered, not disassembled carelessly, but positioned with intention, as if acknowledging that even in death they belonged side by side. Nora stepped forward first. She touched nothing, but she bowed her head. Irene spoke quietly, her voice shaped by knowledge and sympathy, not pity. There are clear signs this was not an accident. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had expected this, needed this, feared this. Irene pointed to fractures on the ribs and sternum of Thomas's skeleton. These fractures are consistent with blunt force impact prior to submersion. Not pressure from water, not deceleration from driving into a lake. Something or someone hit him in the chest. Hard. She then pointed to Elena's left forearm bones. These breaks happened while she was alive, and they are defensive breaks. She tried to shield herself. She was protecting her face. Nora closed her eyes. Daniel did not move. Irene continued. There's more. Their seatbelts were not simply worn. They were locked from the outside. The mechanism was jammed with sediment before the car entered the lake. Meaning, they were restrained, Daniel finished, voice low, steady. Yes, Irene confirmed. They were placed in the car intentionally. The windows were sealed. The ignition was turned off. They did not drive into that lake. They were sunk. Silence did not swallow the room. It sharpened it. Nora's voice was soft, but it carried. Then they did not die alone. Someone watched Irene, looked up. Carefully. There is a trace substance on the metal fragments near the seatbelts. A petroleum-based sealant, the type used on industrial dock cables. There are only 2 places in this area that used that type of sealant: the Old County Marina and the private contractor docks used during the resort land surveys, the same survey group Thomas had been organizing against. The same company that had threatened their land. The same company partnered with the sheriff's office. Later that afternoon, Daniel drove back toward town, not to his home, not to the sheriff, but to a small house on the outer edge of the county line. A house with faded blue paint and wind chimes made from old spoons. The home of a woman who had not spoken publicly in 12 years. Her name was Marla Graywater. 41 now, once a waitress at the diner where the surveyors, county workers, and developers had gathered like vultures. She was known for remembering everything: who sat with whom, who whispered to whom, who left together, who didn't return. But 12 years ago, after she told the sheriff she had overheard 2 men talking about making the newlywed problem disappear, she suddenly lost her job. Her tires were slashed, her mailbox destroyed. She stopped talking after that. Daniel knocked once. The door opened before his hand fell back to his side. Her eyes were tired, but clear, too clear. "You found the car," she said. Not a question. Daniel nodded. She didn't invite him in. She stepped out and closed the door behind her. For a moment, they stood in the cicada hum of blazing afternoon heat. Then she spoke. "I didn't want to speak back then because no one would have lived through the consequences." Daniel swallowed carefully. "Do you think it's different now?" "No," she said. "But your mother deserves the truth." She looked out toward the tree line, where pine shadows stretched like the memory of something long buried. "It was Clint Rourke and Wade Liston," she whispered. "They were drunk one night at the diner after a council meeting. It was 2 days before the wedding. They said Thomas was ruining everything, that if he kept stirring up the tribe, the developers would pull out. The sheriff would lose backing. The contractors would lose bonuses. They said—" Her voice shook once. She steadied it. "They said they'd handle it. After the wedding, they laughed about it like it was a joke or a chore." Daniel closed his eyes. The world tilted but did not fall. Marla looked at him then, really looked. "There's more," she said quietly. "There was a witness." The night they disappeared, Daniel's eyes opened. Marla nodded. His name was Jonah Cross, Cherokee, fisherman. He saw the green truck follow the Impala. He saw it force them off the road near the lake shore. He heard Elena scream. Daniel's heartbeat stuttered. "Where is he now?" Marla swallowed. "He's still alive. But you're not going to like where he is." 2 hours later, Daniel sat in a chair under flickering fluorescent lights at the Cherokee Valley State Mental Hospital. The kind of place people rarely visit voluntarily. The kind of place where voices echo for too long. Jonah was in a long hallway room with barred windows and paper-thin sheets. He was 56 but looked older. Time had eroded him unevenly. His eyes, though, were sharp, too sharp. Daniel sat across from him. Jonah spoke first, his voice rough, but steady. "You found the car?" Daniel nodded. Jonah nodded back slowly, like someone acknowledging a debt being paid. "They didn't drown quick," Jonah said. No hesitation, no softness. Daniel's breath stopped in his chest. Jonah continued, staring somewhere far away, somewhere he had never escaped. "They were alive when the car went in. They screamed, they pounded the windows. The water rose slow. Slow is worse than fast. Slow begs God to look away. The room felt too small, too quiet, too still." Jonah looked at Daniel. Finally, "I told the sheriff what I saw. I told him the names. I told him the license plate. I told him I heard one of them say, 'Hold her down.'" Daniel's hands trembled. "What did the sheriff do?" he whispered. Jonah laughed. "It was a broken sound. He signed the papers that put me in here." The world did not just shift, it split, because justice had never been delayed. It had been buried alive. There are moments in a story where everything stops pretending, where the lies that once walked confidently now limp, exposed. After hearing Jonah's words, after seeing the quiet ruin inside his eyes, Daniel understood something with perfect clarity. This was never about a car accident. This was never about two young newlyweds making a mistake. This was a silencing, a warning, a message carved into water. And now, after 12 years, the people who carved that message realized their secret had surfaced. Secrets do not stay quiet when the land itself begins to speak. When Daniel walked out of the state mental hospital, the heat had broken. Thick clouds rumbled across the sky, heavy with thunder, as if the storm that had waited all these years finally found its cue. Wind stirred dust and leaves across the gravel lot. The whole world seemed to shift its weight. Nora was waiting for him in the truck. She didn't ask what Jonah said. She didn't need to. A mother knows when truth arrives, and when it arrives hard. She simply said, "Then we move forward." But moving forward meant confronting the man whose shadow had hung over the case for 12 years. Clint Rourke, survey coordinator, developer's liaison, sheriff's hunting buddy, the man whose truck, or at least its license plate, had been found jammed under the Impala, the man whose threats Thomas had not taken quietly, the man whose name sat like a rot in the air now that people were speaking it again. He still lived near the lake. Of course he did. Men who steal land often like to sit on porches overlooking it. His house was big now, much bigger than it was in 1983. Expansion paid for by contracts, by signatures forced through, by progress that came with chainsaws and legal loopholes. His deck faced the water. Wind chimes made of polished antlers hung from the rafters, clinking softly in the rising breeze. Daniel and Nora walked up the long gravel driveway. They made noise intentionally. No hiding, no sneaking, no chance of accusation of trespass. They wanted to be seen. Clint opened the door before they reached it. He was older, but not softened. Thick-necked, shoulders still broad, hands calloused from work, but stained with something time could not wash clean. His eyes were pale, the kind that never reflected what they felt. He smiled. "Well, look who finally found something to stir up again," he said, leaning against the doorframe like this was nothing more than a casual visit. Nora didn't speak first. Daniel did. "We found the car." The smile didn't fade, but something behind the eyes shifted. "That right?" Clint asked. Daniel held his gaze. "We know you forced them off the road. We know the seatbelts were locked. We know you sealed the windows. We know Elena fought you, and we know Thomas was hit before the car ever went into the water." Clint's jaw moved, slow, chewing the words like dry meat. "That's a hell of a story," he said. "But see, a story ain't evidence." "You left evidence under the car," Daniel said. "Your license plate." For the first time, the smile faded. Clint didn't speak for several seconds. Then, "You think you know what you're dealing with." It wasn't a question. Nora stepped forward then, close enough that he had to straighten to face her. She was smaller than him, but there was no sense of smallness in her. "You drowned my children," she said, voice low, steady, sharp as polished flint. "And you buried our grief under water. You sent a witness to an institution so he couldn't speak. You made the sheriff complicit. You thought the lake was deep enough to hold your shame." Lightning flashed in the distance, white and silent. "But the water receded," she finished, "and now you will answer." Clint leaned closer, and his voice turned quiet, too quiet. "You don't want to go digging around in things you don't understand. Some people worked very hard to make sure this all stayed peaceful." Daniel stepped between them instantly. "Peaceful?" he snapped. "You call this peaceful?" Clint shrugged. Could have been worse. Something about that sentence chilled the air around them. Then Clint said something even colder. "You think I was the one in charge." Daniel's breath caught, because that sentence meant there was someone above him, someone bigger, someone with more to lose. And that meant this was not just a personal killing. This was systemic. Clint's voice hardened. "Walk away. Let the dead rest. You start pushing and you'll have more than ghosts to bury." Daniel didn't move. Nora didn't blink. Clint inhaled deeply. Then, carefully, deliberately, he closed the door. They returned to town under a bruised sky, thunder rolling like distant drums. As they drove, rain began to fall. Not gentle, heavy, sharp. The kind of rain that erases tracks but reveals truths in the same breath. But something was wrong when they pulled into their driveway. A truck was parked across the road. A green truck, not old, not rusted. Fresh paint, same model, same company colors. The driver sat inside, watching, not moving, waiting. Daniel froze. Nora didn't. She walked forward, head high, each step measured. The driver never rolled down the window, never turned their head, never acknowledged her. The truck slowly pulled away, tires whispering across wet road, disappearing down the bend. But it didn't need to speak. The message was clear. We are still here. We are still watching. Stop digging. Daniel stood rooted in the mud, rain soaking through his shirt. He remembered Jonah's voice. They didn't drown fast. Slow is worse. Slow was a threat. Slow was a promise. Daniel closed his eyes and whispered back to the storm. Then we won't be slow. Because now, the land, the lake, the bones, the witnesses, all pointed in one direction. To the man above Clint. The man whose signature was on every land acquisition contract. the man who funded the sheriff's campaigns, the man who built the resort proposal, the man whose company had everything to lose if Thomas had succeeded. Richard Halden, owner of Halden Resource and Development, the one who wanted the lake, and the one who killed to get it. The storm did not pass quickly. It settled over the valley like something ancient reclaiming space. Rain hammered rooftops. Wind scraped branches across windows. And underneath it all, the land felt alive, restless, remembering. Daniel and Nora remained awake through the night. Not out of fear, out of recognition. There is a moment in every fight for truth when the other side realizes you will not turn back. That moment had arrived, and it carried weight. In the early morning, the storm broke, leaving the air heavy and wet. Mist clung low across the fields. Roads glistened. A quiet, watchful silence settled over the town. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, maps spread in front of him. Old survey maps. The ones Thomas had copied in secret. The ones he believed contained the evidence of land theft disguised as development. The lake wasn't chosen at random. It wasn't simply land. It was leverage. The developers, Halden Resource and Development, intended to reroute water access rights. The resort was a cover. The real objective was control of the watershed. Control of the watershed meant power. Power that could be turned into money, influence, and political foothold for decades. Thomas hadn't just been a nuisance. He had been an obstacle they couldn't buy, so they removed him. Nora entered quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The fabric was old, woven by her own mother. Deep red and black patterns shaped like river lines and mountains. She set a cup of warm tea beside Daniel. He knew, she said softly. Your brother saw the shape of the future. He understood what they were doing. Daniel nodded. His voice was low when he finally spoke. We need to make it public. Nora's eyes darkened, thoughtful. There is a way, she said. She pulled a small folded paper from an envelope, something Daniel had not seen in years. A paper so worn the creases were soft like cloth. It was a land claim document, signed by tribal elders in 1968, verifying Cherokee stewardship of the watershed zone. A document that would legally challenge the resort construction. A document Thomas had been gathering support to use. A document that had been lost during the original investigation. Except it hadn't been lost. Nora had kept it. For when the truth returned, she said. Daniel stared at her, stunned, trembling, moved. But before either of them could speak again, there was a knock on the door. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Nora opened it. Sheriff Adler stood on the porch, hat in his hands, rainwater still clinging to the brim. His uniform was rumpled. His face looked older, tired, fractured. He did not step inside. He did not assume welcome. He simply said, "They're coming for Jonah." The world tensed. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. The sheriff exhaled shakily. He talked. Someone heard. Someone told Halden. They think Jonah's going to testify. They want him gone before he does. Nora's expression did not change. "You're here to warn us?" she asked. Adler's voice cracked. Not loudly, but enough. I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know they were going to drown them. I thought it was intimidation. I thought it was threats. I didn't... He stopped. Words failed. It is a terrible thing, realizing you have helped bury someone you grew up with. Daniel stepped forward, jaw set. You can still help. Adler shook his head. There's no undoing what's already done. There's only choosing what happens next. He looked directly into Daniel's eyes. They'll move tonight. They'll silence Jonah. And once he's gone, your case dies with him." Daniel didn't wait for permission. He grabbed his keys. But Adler blocked him. "No, you go there now. They'll see you. They'll know you're coming." Daniel shoved past him. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to do." The sheriff spoke with a hushed urgency. "Not what you do, who you bring." And then Daniel understood. The tribal council, not the political council, the elder council. The governing voice older than the sheriff's badge, older than Halden's money, older than the state. And if the council spoke, truly spoke, the nation would rise. They drove to the tribal longhouse on the hill above the town, a cedar building warmed by low-burning fires and soft drums. Elders sat in silence, listening to the world the way trees listen to wind. Nora presented the land document. Daniel recounted Jonah's testimony. Sheriff Adler confessed his part in the silence. The room did not react loudly. Elders do not rush rage, they let it settle, take root, become direction. The eldest among them, Grandmother Tolly, her hair white, her presence unshakable, finally spoke. The land does not forget. The water does not forget. The bones of the stolen have risen. Their voices have returned. She looked at Daniel. "You will go to Jonah. You will bring him back, not in secret, not in shadow." But together she lifted her staff. Drums outside stopped. Men, women, youth. All who heard her voice gathered. The council rose. They were not going to sneak Jonah out. They were going to arrive for him as a community, as a nation. The hospital was surrounded by fences and cameras and security glass. But fences do not stop people who have decided to remember who they are. Word spread. Dozens of tribal members formed a caravan of trucks and cars, not shouting, not storming, just arriving, like river water moving where river water chooses to move. When they reached the gates, security froze. Because this was not a protest. This was a people returning for their own. The administrator stammered, "You can't just—" Grandmother Tolly raised her staff. "We come for him." And the administrator, feeling the weight of something older than law, stepped aside. They found Jonah in his room, sitting on the edge of the bed, hands clasped. When Daniel entered, Jonah looked up and said only, "You came." Daniel nodded. "We don't leave our own behind," he said. Jonah stood, slow, stiff, but steady, and walked out with them. The community surrounded him, not shielding him with force but with presence, because presence can be armor. They escorted Jonah into the caravan, but someone was waiting in the distance, watching through rain-smeared glass. A black SUV, engine running, headlights off. Inside, a silhouette, unmoving. The storm wind gusted, thunder cracked, and lightning lit up the license plate. Halden Industries, corporate vehicle. The war was no longer hidden. It was stepping into daylight, and daylight does not lie. They say there is a moment when truth stops whispering and begins to knock. Not lightly, not politely, but with the weight of all the years it was forced to wait. The caravan of cars, trucks, and vans carrying Jonah back to the reservation moved as one slow river through the wet morning roads. Rain dripped from mirrors. Tires hissed through puddles. The mist hung low, making the world feel close, pressed in tight. Inside Daniel's truck, Jonah sat in the passenger seat. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. He stared out the window, watching the wet fields blur past. "You remember the night?" Daniel asked quietly. Jonah nodded. "Every day since." Silence settled like fog between them. Jonah's voice, when it came, was thin but steady. They forced them off the road. The Impala slid into the ditch near the old levee. Thomas tried to fight. He got one of them in the throat with his elbow. That's why they hit him, Hard, they dragged Elena. She clawed at the ground, left tracks. But rain washed them by morning. The words shook Daniel's bones. Jonah continued. They didn't plan to drown them. They planned to scare them, to shut them up. But when Thomas fought back, it changed. Fury changes everything Daniel's breath caught. Jonah turned his head just enough to meet Daniel's eyes. They laughed when the water rose. Some men laugh when they feel powerful. Some laugh to drown the sound of what they're doing. Daniel did not speak. He could not. The caravan crested the hill into Cherokee land, and there, waiting at the entrance, stood elders, families, and youths, all silent, all watching, all present. The air felt heavy, as though the storm clouds themselves bowed. Jonah was escorted to the longhouse, not as a spectacle, but as a witness returning to his voice. But news travels on roads people don't see, and Halden did not wait. Later that afternoon, while Jonah rested under guard, Daniel drove alone toward the old county hall, the building where public land survey records were stored, a squat brick building with wide windows and fluorescent lights that hummed faintly. He didn't go alone because he was reckless. He went because he finally understood something. The records were the key. If the land ownership map Thomas uncovered still existed, it would prove that Halden had no legal right to the lake. It would prove that the resort project was born from theft, and it would expose everyone who helped cover it. But records, like bones, are easy to bury. He found the door locked. Naturally, but there was someone already waiting in the parking lot. Sheriff Adler. Wet hat. Same white shirt. Sleeves rolled up. No badge pinned to his chest this time. He held a ring of keys loosely in his hand. I figured you'd come here, he said. Daniel didn't thank him. He wasn't ready for forgiveness, but he nodded once. Adler unlocked the door. Inside, the building smelled of mold and dust. Fluorescent lights flickered awake overhead. The records room was down a hallway lined with old photographs of county commissioners and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Halden's face appeared in more than one frame, shaking hands, holding shovels, smiling at podiums. Adler led the way, but halfway down the hall he stopped. He turned. His voice trembled, just slightly. What I did can't be undone. But I can do this. I can stand on the right side now. Daniel looked at him for a long time. Then he said simply, "Then stand." They entered the record storage. Rows of metal filing cabinets stretched like narrow corridors. The air was cool and stale. Adler pulled out a file box labeled Watershed Acquisition, 1980 to 1985. But when he opened it, the box was empty, not misfiled, removed, before someone could notice. Daniel's chest tightened. Someone else had been there. Someone who already knew the lake car had been found. Someone who knew the truth was unraveling. Adler slammed the box shut. Frustration cracked through him. They're clearing evidence. Daniel didn't answer. He moved through the room slowly, searching shelf by shelf, drawer by drawer, until he reached a cabinet marked Archive, not in active use. He opened it. Inside were folders yellowed with age, brittle, edges curled, maps, signatures, council approvals. The original 1968 Watershed Protection Agreement wasn't there. Nora had that. But something else was. Something Thomas had mentioned once. A survey blueprint. Daniel pulled the rolled paper out gently. When he unrolled it across the table, even Adler inhaled sharply. The map showed a section of lake shoreline labeled Tribal Cultural Site. Burial grounds. Right where Halden's resort docks were planned. Right where Thomas had tried to stop construction. Right where the Impala was sunk. The resort was not just illegal, it was desecration. An attack on sacred land, an attack on memory, an attack on identity. Daniel felt his hand shake, not with fear, with purpose. He rolled the map and tucked it under his arm. Adler locked the room again. They left the building in silence, but the silence broke the moment they stepped outside, because the black SUV was waiting again. This time, the driver's window rolled slowly down. Inside sat Richard Halden. White hair, clean suit, hands folded calmly. A man with the confidence of someone who believed the world bent around his decisions. He spoke without raising his voice. "You're stirring ghosts, Daniel Blackwood." Daniel stepped closer. They were never ghosts. You made them ghosts. Halden tilted his head slightly, studied him. "You should understand something," Halden said. "Your brother was warned. He chose defiance, and defiance has consequences." Daniel's voice was low and sharp now. "You drowned him because he protected our land." Halden smiled, a smile without warmth. "No. I drowned him because he threatened progress. And you are threatening it again." The storm wind picked up, bending the trees. Halden continued, "You cannot win. The land deals are signed. The state is mine. The sheriff was mine. The courts are mine. The lake was mine." Daniel's grip tightened around the rolled survey map. "The lake," he said, "was never yours." Halden's eyes narrowed, the first crack in his mask. Then he said, "You think the lake was the only place we buried things?" The words hung heavy, because they were not metaphor. Halden rolled the window up. The SUV pulled away, slow, unhurried, certain. Daniel stood motionless long after the engine disappeared, because Halden had not spoken in threat. He had spoken in memory. He knew something Daniel didn't. Something not yet found. Something still hidden. Something worse. In the house they once lived in, the house where Thomas and Elena packed their wedding gifts, the house where they laughed their last morning, the house that was later sold cheaply to a couple with no children, a house with 3 bedrooms, a cellar, and a sealed-off pantry door no one had opened in decades, a house that Halden's company renovated right after the search was called off, a house that held its breath for 12 years, the house with the hidden room. The house had always been quiet. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from something unspoken sitting in the walls, pressed into the paint, breathing behind the boards. After Thomas and Elena disappeared, no one in the family wanted to stay there. Memories clung to the rooms like ghosts, the laughter in the hallway, the wedding dress hanging by the window, the unfinished breakfast plates drying in the sink. So the property was sold quickly, too quickly, below market value. The deed passed through 2 realtors, 3 signatures, and then into the hands of a couple who kept to themselves. A couple that never hosted gatherings, never invited neighbors, never made repairs in the open. They lived there, but the house never looked lived in. Curtains always drawn, porch lights always off, the mailbox always empty. And now, 12 years later, Daniel stood outside that same house, the sky still damp from rain. The yard was overgrown, paint peeled from the shutters. The gravel driveway had sunk in places, yet the structure felt untouched, preserved, not by care, but by avoidance. Nora stood beside him, hands clasped, shoulders steady, but heart heavy. Jonah waited in the truck behind them, leaning against the passenger door, eyes scanning the tree line as though memory might appear in the mist. The front door opened before they knocked. The couple who lived there now stood in the doorway, Bill and Nancy Holloway, both in their 50s, both with faces carved by the strain of people who learned long ago to stay silent to survive. They didn't look surprised. They didn't ask why Daniel was there. Nancy just stepped aside. "Come in," she said softly. They entered the living room. The furniture was sparse. The walls were bare, no family photos, no decorations, no signs of life, as though they were only waiting, as though their time here had never been theirs. Bill spoke first. "We didn't know at first," he said. His voice was low, gravelly. "We bought the place because it was cheap. Because we needed somewhere to stay after my layoff." Didn't ask questions, Nancy swallowed. "It was the pantry that made us understand," she whispered, "the one near the kitchen." Daniel felt something tighten inside his chest. Nora closed her eyes. Nancy gestured for them to follow. The hallway seemed narrower than Daniel remembered, as if the walls had pressed inward over time. The kitchen smelled faintly of damp wood and something older, something heavy. The pantry door was small, painted white, with a single brass knob. Nothing unusual at first glance, until you noticed the hinges. They were on the outside, just like a cell door. Nancy placed her hand on the knob. "We didn't open it," she said. We couldn't." "It didn't feel right," Bill added quietly. "When we moved in, the realtor said that room led to a crawlspace." But there was no crawlspace, and the door was sealed with 3 layers of paint. Daniel felt his pulse in his throat. Nora rested her palm on the door, not trembling, not frightened, ready. Jonah stepped forward. "Let me," he murmured. He pulled a pocket knife, slid the blade along the seam of the door, cutting through layers of paint so thick they peeled in curling strips. The door creaked softly. The house seemed to shiver. A tension lifted from the floorboards, the walls, as though something inside had been waiting to be known. The knob turned. The door swung open. Darkness waited inside, dense and still. The single windowless space was small, no larger than a walk-in pantry, but the air that rolled out was cold, stale, mineral-rich. Not the cold of temperature, the cold of something that was stopped, held, preserved by time. Daniel clicked on his flashlight. The beam caught dust drifting like ash, and then something on the floor. No, several things. Bones, not scattered, arranged. Human bones. But not like the car, not water-worn, not smoothed by silt and time. These bones were dry, brittle, left to rest in still darkness for over a decade. 3 bodies, 2 adult-sized, 1 child-sized. Daniel's breath broke. Nora stiffened, a hand pressed to her chest. Nancy turned away, wiping her face. Bill swallowed hard, jaw clenched. Jonah did not move. He recognized the bones of the adults, but it was the child that no one expected. A child no one had known existed. A child who had not been in the wedding photos, not in the community gathering memories, not in the stories whispered over the years. Irene's voice echoed in Daniel's mind. "There is always more buried than the lake returns." Daniel knelt, slowly, reverently. The child's bones were small, fragile, barely formed. The skull delicate, likely 3 years old, maybe younger. There were remnants of a cloth blanket still wrapped around the tiny rib cage. Faded thread, a familiar pattern. Nora recognized it instantly. She had woven that blanket herself, the year Thomas and Elena married. She staggered back, breath shattering in her lungs. Elena had been pregnant. Not at the wedding. Before. No one knew. Or someone knew. Someone made sure they did not live long enough to bring a child into the world. Someone who needed their legacy erased completely. Daniel forced his breath steady. The light shook in his hand. Behind him, Bill whispered, "I heard things sometimes. At night. Soft sounds, like crying. We thought it was the house settling. We told ourselves that Nancy wiped her face again. We didn't know what to do. We didn't want to lose the house, but we couldn't stay here anymore, not with this. Not knowing what was behind that door, Nora knelt beside her grandchildren's bones, because that's what they were. Grief did not break her. It rooted her. Her voice was a prayer. "You were not forgotten," she said. "We found you. We are here. We carry you." The air in the room shifted, something unburied, something released. But Daniel's mind was already turning, not toward sorrow, toward motive. Because this wasn't just murder. This was erasure. Killing Thomas and Elena wasn't enough. Halden and Rourke had wanted to erase their lineage, their future, their claim to the land. The child, unnamed, unknown, unrecorded, was the true target. The family line, the legal inheritor, the evidence, the human proof. Daniel rose slowly to his feet. "We bring them home," he said. Nora nodded, eyes steady, fierce. "We bury them with our ancestors," she said. But Jonah's voice rose, soft, shaking, urgent. "Not yet." Everyone turned. Jonah pointed to the back wall of the hidden room, where the flashlight revealed something carved into the wood. Not words, symbols, Cherokee syllabary. Nora leaned in. Her voice cracked as she translated. "They didn't drown. They were taken. Speak for us, Elena wrote that, or Thomas, maybe both. Before the lake, before the night, before the silence, their last message, their plea, their proof, their voice, carved into the wood of their own home." Nora touched the carving with trembling fingers. The house was no longer silent. It had been speaking for 12 years. No one had listened. Until now. Daniel stepped backward, breath steadying, grief forging into purpose. "We finish this," he said. No one questioned him. No one argued. Because now the story was no longer rumor, no longer memory, no longer loss. It was evidence, physical, witnessed, written, lived. But as they prepared to leave the house, headlights swept across the yard. Not one vehicle, 3. Engines rumbling, doors opening, boots on gravel, voices, not shouting, confident, unhurried. The men who had buried the truth weren't running, they were coming to stop it. And this time, no rain or lake or darkness would hide what came next. The gravel outside crackled under tires, slow and deliberate, not rushed, not panicked. The kind of approach made by men who believe the world still bends for them. Rainwater glistened in the yard as the engines shut off. The headlights stayed on, casting long shadows across the porch and yard. Tree branches swayed, flickering the light like a heartbeat. Daniel stepped forward from the pantry doorway and positioned himself between the house and the front entrance. Nora stood behind him, her hands resting lightly on the back of a wooden chair, not in fear, but in readiness. Jonah remained near the hallway, shoulders squared, breathing slow and intentional. Bill and Nancy lingered near the edge of the kitchen, stiffened by the terrible knowledge of what was coming but refusing to hide. The front door remained closed, but outside, car doors slammed. Then voices, low, familiar. Clint Rourke's first. "Daniel," he called, tone almost friendly. "I know you're in there, and I know you found something you shouldn't have." The silence inside the house was heavy, but steady. Another voice joined him, deeper, smooth, rehearsed. "Richard Halden." "You're caught in something bigger than you understand," Halden said, his tone calm, like he was narrating a sales pitch. "We can settle this. Your family has suffered enough. Let's not drag this out further." Daniel's voice was even, not loud, not shaking. "You murdered my brother, his wife, and their child." A beat of quiet. Clint spoke again. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the tone betrayed itself, the wobble of a story cracking. Daniel stepped closer to the door, not to open it, but to be heard clearly. "Then why are you here?" Silence thickened. Outside, boots shifted on gravel. Halden exhaled slowly, and his voice changed. No smoothness, no diplomacy. Pure truth now, stripped and cold. Because you were supposed to leave it alone. Because your brother could have walked away. Because the land was always going to be taken. The resort was just a piece of it. The water rights, the fracking plans, the mineral rights, that lake is sitting on a fortune. And we were never going to let sentiment stand in the way of progress. Nora closed her eyes, not in despair, but in fierce, grieving recognition. Daniel answered. Progress for who? Halden didn't hesitate. For those who can use it, which meant not for them, not for Cherokee families, not for the community, not for the land. Clint stepped closer to the porch. His boots scuffed the first step. His breathing was visible in the cool, damp air. You're coming out, Clint said, right now. And you're bringing the man from the hospital with you. Jonah's fingers curled into fists. Nora spoke then, her voice steady as stone. You locked him away because he saw you. You drowned my children because they protected our land, and you left a baby to die in the dark. You think you can erase truth because you buried it. Clint's voice snapped sharp. Enough! But Jonah rose from the hallway, and his voice did not shake. I watched you push their car. I heard her screaming. I saw Thomas fight while you laughed. I watched you drown them. I saw you return to this house. I saw you carry the baby inside. I saw the sheriff outside, waiting in the truck. I saw everything. And I did not die. I am still here. The world held its breath. Outside, footsteps froze. Halden spoke low and lethal. You're all fools if you think anyone will believe a mentally unstable fisherman and a grieving family clinging to ghosts. Jonah stepped beside Daniel, eyes burning now with something bright and unstoppable. They will believe the bones. Silence. Then, from outside, the sharp metallic sound of a weapon being chambered. Daniel didn't look back. He already knew. Nora whispered, "Hold." And then, through the mist, a sound approached. Not engines, not boots, footsteps, many, dozens, voices, the community, the council, people from the reservation, people who had heard, people who came, not with guns, not with violence, with presence, with witness. Flashlights lit the trees, lanterns glowed, firelight flickered. Men, women, elders, teens, mothers holding babies, fathers holding sons. The entire community moved through the mist like the land itself had woken. Grandmother Tolly stood at the front, staff in hand, white hair loose, eyes bright with a fire no storm could drown. She spoke, not loud, but in a voice that carried like thunder carried across mountains. This land remembers. Halden took a step back. Clint's breath caught. The deputy who had come with them froze and quietly lowered his weapon. No one had prepared for this. No one had prepared for the truth to have witnesses. Daniel opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. Not running, not hiding, standing. Nora and Jonah came beside him. Grandmother Tolly lifted her staff. You cannot stop what is already returned, she said to Halden. The water rose. The bones spoke. The child called. The house opened. You have no place to hide now. Halden's face twisted, pride cracking into fear. You think this changes anything? He hissed. Grandmother Tolly's answer was soft. It changes everything. Clint looked at the crowd, and he finally understood this was not a family. This was a nation, and nations do not break for men. Halden's voice tried one last time to sound powerful. Do you know who I am? Grandmother Tolly stepped closer. Yes, she said, the land does. The rain began again, but softly this time, not violent, not angry, cleansing, like something had finally shifted. And tomorrow, the truth would no longer be rumor. Tomorrow, the truth would be revealed, in the daylight, in the open, and the town would have to choose what it was made of. Dawn came gray and heavy, like the sky was unsure if it should rise into morning or fall back into night. Mist clung to the ground. The air smelled of wet cedar and earth, the kind of scent that follows storms which do not just pass, but change things. The community did not go home. They stayed through the night, standing guard around the house, around Jonah, around the bones wrapped in white cloth and cedar branches. No one spoke in loud voices. Words were soft, shared in murmurs, almost prayers. Even the wind moved carefully through the trees. Daniel hadn't slept, but there was no exhaustion in him, only clarity, the kind that comes when grief is no longer shapeless, when pain has a face, when truth has weight. They waited for daylight because truth revealed in darkness is always doubted. Truth revealed in the sunburns. When morning finally rose, they made their way to the tribal courthouse. Not a grand building, but one built from stone and wood and memory. The hall filled quickly. Tribal members pressed shoulder to shoulder. Elders sat in the front. Youth clustered in the back. Some clutched hands. Others clutched photographs. Some wept quietly, not from shock, but from the exhaustion of carrying 12 years of unanswered prayers. Jonah was led to the witness table, his hands steady now, his breath calm. He did not look like a broken man anymore. He looked like a man who had carried memory as a burden and was finally allowed to set it down. Nora sat beside him, not as support, as presence. Daniel stood before the council holding the rolled survey map, the land deed, and a photograph of Thomas and Elena from their wedding day, the one where she leaned into him and he looked like he was laughing at life itself. Sheriff Adler entered last. He walked quietly, without ceremony. He took the stand not because he was forced, but because it was time. His voice was low but unwavering. I knew. Not everything, but enough. I was weak. I was afraid of losing my position, my home, my place in this community. I told myself I was protecting order, but I was protecting power, their power, not ours, not yours. He looked at Nora when he said the last words. He did not ask forgiveness. He did not deserve it. But he spoke the truth, finally. It was something. Evidence was presented. Not rumors, not grief, not memory, evidence. The forensic findings, fractures, restraints, sealed windows, the second license plate, the map proving sacred burial grounds beneath resort plans, the carving inside the hidden room, Elena and Thomas's last message, the bones of the child. The courtroom was silent except for breathing. When Jonah rose to testify, he did not tremble. His voice was rough, lined with years of silence, but true. I saw them force the car. I saw them drag Elena. I saw them strike Thomas. I heard them laugh. I saw the sheriff waiting. I saw the baby brought back to this house. I saw the door shut. I saw them leave his eyes burned, but tears did not fall. I spoke. And they buried me alive in that hospital, but I didn't die. I waited for the lake to speak. Nora placed her hand over his. The room inhaled as one. Then the council called Clint Rourke. He did not walk in willingly. Deputies escorted him. His face was pale. The confidence he carried like armor had cracked. He looked out at a room with no allies, only memory. "Did you force their car off the road?" the council elder asked. Clint's jaw twitched. He said nothing. "Did you restrain them?" the elder asked. His breathing faltered. "Did you drown them?" the elder asked. Then Clint broke, not into confession, but into fear. "They told me to do it. Halden told me. The sheriff said it would be fine. They said nobody would look because nobody ever listens to you people. Those words fell like acid. You people. The room did not erupt, it hardened. Because there it was. The truth beneath everything, not greed alone, not profit alone. Dehumanization, the belief that native lives could be erased without consequence. Finally, Richard Halden was brought in. He did not look defeated, he looked offended, as though inconvenience, not justice, had dragged him here. He refused to sit. "I have nothing to answer for," he said. "I acted in the best interest of the county. The land was underutilized. The tribe would have benefited from tourism. Your people cling to the past like it's a blanket. You cannot hold back progress," Grandmother Tolly rose. "No anger, no raised voice, just truth. We do not cling to the past," she said. "We carry it. You tried to bury it. But the land remembers. The water remembers. The bones remember. And now, everyone remembers." Halden scoffed and turned to leave. But he did not leave. Deputies stepped forward. The law, which once protected him, no longer recognized him. He was arrested. Not for rumor, for murder, conspiracy, tampering with evidence, illegal burial, destruction of tribal land, fraud. Every step he took out of that hall was heavy, because the world was watching now, and the story was no longer his. The burials took place 3 days later. The community gathered by the riverbank, under cottonwood trees, where the land was soft and the wind carried prayers. Elena, Thomas, and their child were laid to rest together. Cedar smoke rose in slow spirals. Songs were sung in Cherokee, old songs, songs that call memory home. Nora placed the woven blanket, the one that had wrapped the child, into the earth. Daniel placed a sunflower, the same flowers thrown at the wedding, beside them. Jonah spoke a prayer. His voice was whole again, and the river carried it. In the weeks that followed, Halden's company contracts imploded. Investigations spread into old land seizures. Files resurfaced. People spoke. The sheriff resigned and cooperated fully. Clint testified. More arrests followed. Quiet ones, sudden ones, expected ones. The resort never broke ground. The lake was protected by federal order. The tribal land rights were strengthened. The burial site was recognized and marked. And Thomas's dream, a youth center where Cherokee children could learn language, stories, music, was built in his name. A long building of warm wood, open doors, and steady laughter. Daniel oversaw it. Nora visited daily. Jonah sat by the lake sometimes, fishing, quietly at peace. The land healed slowly. But it healed, because the truth did not disappear. It returned, like the water, like the bones, like memory. And some stories end not with justice fully restored, but with justice finally seen,